now the question comes, what role will the United States and indeed the world community play in this war? Has Israel wrong-footed America and the United Nations? Has the UN become simply a toothless body? And is there at all any end game in sight? Joining me now is Syed Akbaruddin, a distinguished diplomat and India's former permanent representative to the United Nations. He's also served in countries in the Arab world. And Irfan Nooruddin is professor at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service in Washington. First to you, Mr. Akbaruddin, what's your sense? You've probably heard what the Palestinians said. Say they're ready for a ceasefire, ready to return hostages if Israel agrees to a ceasefire. Israelis saying nothing doing. We're going to finish Hamas. We're going to finish Hezbollah. We're going to target Iran. How do you see this? Is the world helpless in the face of an escalating conflict, Mr. Akbaruddin?
So, Rajdeep, thank you for giving me the opportunity to engage with you. What was a shadow war or a shadow conflict of a non-traditional nature has now come out in the open. The non-traditional conflict has been going on for years, whether it's using Stuxnets against Iranian nuclear facilities or non-state actors against Israel. So what has now come out has been after a prolonged period of a non-traditional conflict. And that's the normal way. You start off in a non-traditional manner, and then you come to the harsher forms of conflict. That's what we see ourselves in. Having said that, is there a way out? You can clearly see diplomacy has run its course right now. Both are on an escalatory path, and the only way is from escalation to then de-escalate. So there are some more military or military assertions before diplomacy will step in, because it's pretty clear.
If I may just stop you for a moment, doesn't that show the weakness, particularly of the United Nations? Mr. Guterres has from time and again called for a ceasefire, and yet the bombings of Gaza continue. They've now spread to Lebanon, to Syria, and possibly will target Iran as well. It seems that, if I may be allowed to use the word, the United Nations appears impotent.
So, Rajdeep, the discussion on the Middle East started in the United Nations in 1947 through a Committee on Palestine. And what was on offer then was a two-state solution. What's on offer now again by everybody after going around for 70 plus years is still the same. So let's not say it's only the United Nations. Diplomacy by everybody, the US, Russia, everybody else has not succeeded, and we can get into the reasons. So I don't think what hasn't been possible for 70 plus years should be laid firmly at the door of one entity. But all of us haven't succeeded, and that's a fair thing to say.
Let me for a moment bring in Irfan Nooruddin. Irfan Nooruddin, America, billed as the superpower of the world, caught in a presidential election of its own, a very polarizing election. It seems Biden's administration is helpless at the moment. There was talk that a Lebanese foreign minister to CNN International claimed that Nasrallah was ready for a ceasefire, brokered possibly by the UN and America, but nothing happened out of it.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there's a couple of factors here. One is, of course, that this is a month from the presidential election on November 5th. It puts Mr. Biden, Vice President Harris, everyone in a very difficult situation, because you're balancing both about wanting to make sure that this doesn't escalate into an all-out war, but also thinking about the domestic politics, a very large and influential Jewish American diaspora that has, often wielded great influence over foreign policy, and increasingly vocal and organized Palestinian, Arab American community. So caught between a rock and a hard place in that regard. Much of the diplomacy, of course, happens behind the scenes. And I think one thing that is true is that Israel and Prime Minister Netanyahu are very savvy about understanding America's domestic limitations, but maybe playing a short-term game at long-term cost. One way or the other, we know that there'll be a new president in office after November. If President Trump is reelected, you probably have a very pro-Israel regime coming back in, a very anti-Iran regime coming back in. But if Vice President Harris is elected, I suspect you're going to see a much tougher line on Israel taken by her. Maybe not as hard as a lot of people might like, but much harder. There is lots of leakages coming out of the White House, out of the State Department about how unhappy President Biden and the senior administration are with the stance that Israel has taken, and in particular Mr. Netanyahu.
But can they do anything about it? You're saying that they're unhappy with the stance that Netanyahu has taken, but Netanyahu probably believes he can get away, and Netanyahu is using this for his political survival.
Absolutely. So Netanyahu is in a desperate situation. He's gambling for resurrection over here. He's unpopular at home. But, what unites them is, of course, that the actions of Hezbollah make it very easy for Netanyahu to say, listen, is this the future for your children? Is this what we want? That we're constantly under bombardment. We have clear evidence that Hezbollah was supporting Hamas. We're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of that horrific terrorist attack on October 7th. So you have, Netanyahu knows how to do this. He's a survivor. He knows how to play this. I think from the United States perspective, again, we don't know what's happening behind the scenes. We do know that there are conversations happening in Doha, which is a very steadfast U.S. partner. And so I suspect there's a lot of pressure being put on, but what can they physically do, right? I mean, the tools available to the United States, and in fact to any power in this situation, are very limited. Iran's intervention over here was unfortunate because Iran chose to get involved in a conflict that ostensibly was not directly about Iran. They have said that they are willing to step back now as long as Israel doesn't respond. Your previous guest makes it sound like that's unlikely, which would be very unfortunate. So my sense is that there'll be some more escalation before hopefully calmer heads prevail.
Let me bring that to you, Syed Akbaruddin. Iran entering this conflict, does that make it even more difficult for the United Nations? We've already seen G7 condemnation of Iran. Iran is seen as a red rag to large parts of the world. Does that even make it more difficult now to see any possible solution because Iran enters the conflict, Mr. Akbaruddin?
Rajdeep, Iran has been there for some time. It's been playing in the shadows. What has now come out is in the open. Everybody knows that there are non-state actors who have been funded by Iran, who have been armed by Iran. So it's a project which has been going on for years. Yes, that it has come out in the open has created a flutter because you are now going to see the second divide in the Middle East. The first divide was between Arabs and Israelis on the Palestine issue. The second divide is perhaps between Israel and Iran. And in that divide, obviously, it's a newer divide for everybody to understand and to come to grips with. But it's also a more challenging divide because it has the potential for collateral damage, if you may say, or a damage for many others in the neighborhood or even in the extended neighborhood like India.
No, but do you believe, Mr. Akbaruddin, that therefore makes it even more difficult? You said that there will be an escalation and then a de-escalation. Are we on an escalatory spiral where de-escalation now seems even further away?
No, I mean, sure, escalation can also be a managed escalation, as happened in April. Let's not forget, a similar attack was ventured into by Iran in April, yet it de-escalated very quickly. And this
do you see that happening again, if I may ask? Do you see April repeating, or is it now qualitatively different?
No, it's clearly more difficult than in April. But there are off-ramps even in an escalation that perhaps are being worked on right now. The very fact that the US and the G7 say that nuclear facilities are off the table clearly is indicative that everything is not on the table for the Israelis to respond to. There are other issues also which are being worked on behind the scenes. These will not be available openly, but there will be some escalation. The question only is whether the escalation can be managed, because all escalations, nobody knows, can never be certain about. So that's the difficulty. Not that there can be a managed escalation. Perhaps That's our best chance.
Okay, let me leave it at that point. Syed Akbaruddin, always good to hear you, and Irfan Nooruddin there from Georgetown in the United States. Thank you both for joining me here on the news today. Thank you.